to the variations in videotape, playback VCRs, and televisions, you may find it necessary to adjust the color on your playback television or monitor. Because of the premium tape we use in filming and duplication, you may also have to turn down the contrast. Thank you. Hello, my name is Jerry. I'll be your host, your guide, and your narrator as we tour the most popular spot here in southeast Arizona. That, of course, is Tombstone, referred to as the town too tough to die. This is Tombstone, the base of countless movies, hundreds of books, some accurate, but most of them are not. The story of Tombstone is also the story of people, a few which we will relate here, and the history of Tombstone ties very closely to the history of the immediate area. So let's go back just for a few minutes. I'll tell you what I found out about the history of this most fascinating land, and I'm sure you'll find it every bit as interesting as the town itself. You know, it seems that as children attending school, our history lessons usually stopped at the Mississippi River. Not too much was taught about the opening, the developing, and the expansion of the West. No passenger, no sailor of the Mayflower was even born when Arizona was being explored by the Spaniards. The first exploration was a tiny scouting party consisting of a Moor by the name of Esteban and a Franciscan friar, Marcos de Niza, in late 1538. And that's roughly 69 years before Jamestown and 82 years before the Pilgrims stepped on Plymouth Rock. Based upon Fray Marcos's report, which turned out to be less than accurate, the Great Expedition by Coronado's army was quickly formed. So we can say that the first major exploration was Coronado leading 336 soldiers in full metal armor looking for the fabled 7 cities of Cibola. He started that February 22nd, 1540. 48 short years after Columbus discovered what he thought were the Indies, and 192 years before the birth of George Washington. Coronado also brought the first horses into the area, and it was offspring of these animals that the Apache Indians later used to control this land. This area today looks much the same as it did back then. By speeding through this land on our highways, one loses touch with the dangers that faced early settlers. Dangers would include heat as well as cold, poisonous snakes, poisonous insects, lack of water in the summer, drowning in the flash flood monsoon season. The rough terrain could turn a trip that now takes 1.5 hours from Tucson into a 2 or 3 day affair for the traveler of the late 1870s and 1880s. And that was if you made it at all. The biggest danger to fellow man was, of course, fellow man. The highwaymen, the robbers, the roving gangs, they were all a very great threat. But the greater threat, by far, were the Indians. Because you see, the Indians had a knack. They could make you wish that you were dead. The first Indian killing on record was in 1539 when Esteban, of whom we spoke earlier, was killed by the Zunis. But it wasn't the Zunis that the people here feared. It was the Apaches. Most historians blame the Apaches for the rather late development of the area. Indians with names like Cochise and Ja and Victorio and Mingus Coloradus and Geronimo, they all held sway here. All the land that you see, all the valleys, all the mountains and the ranges, they were called home by the Chiricahua Apaches. They fought the Spaniards, they fought the Mexicans, and they fought the United States Army. In 1 year alone, 50 people that we know of were killed by the Indians, and those are only the ones that we can verify. The heart of their homeland were the Dragoon and the Chiricahua Mountains, located just a few short miles east of Tombstone. From here, a few well-placed Indian snipers could hold off the entire might of the U.S. cavalry. It allowed the Indian warriors rest between battles. The Dragoon and the Chiricahua Mountains quickly became sanctuaries as the Indians struggled to survive America's western progress. At one time, the U.S. Army threw over 5,000 mounted troops armed with field howitzers against Geronimo. And this was at a band of warriors who at no time numbered over 200 men. But it wasn't the 5,000 mounted troops that led Geronimo to surrender for the last time to General Nelson Miles in Skeleton Canyon, September 14, 1886, though. Turned out to be the heliograph. The heliograph was a system of mirrors that was perched high atop mountain peaks, covering an area 200 miles wide by 300 miles long. Geronimo found out he could not hide anymore. He had to give up. Signals from the heliograph They could not be cut like the wires on the telegraph system. Some of the Indians were moved to Florida and then later to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, but others, they fled deep into the Sierra Madre Mountains of northern Mexico, where the last reported sighting was in 1980. George Hand, a homesteader, was the last to die at the hands of the Indians here in 1896. And it's said that Cochise and two of his best horses are buried somewhere here in the western stronghold. In 1881, a chunk of Pima County was renamed Cochise County. But the first miner of record was a German immigrant, Frederick Bunkow, in 1857, and his name was shortened to Bronco by early mapmakers. Bronco left us with two remembrances. He left us with a mine that really wasn't worth too much. He left us with this cabin, the remains of which you see here. Note its position on the top of a small rise. From here, he could see over his mine properties, but more importantly, from here, he could also view any intrusion attempts. But unfortunately, it also overlooks the spot where Bronco was killed by two of his hired workers. He was killed for whatever little money and whatever little supplies he had. His killers fled to Mexico. They were never caught. After his demise, ownership of the cabin was passed back and forth to whoever could take it, whoever could hold it. And it's claimed by local historians here that at least 24 people died in separate events in this immediate area trying to defend or take over this cabin. And that's why this is referred to as Arizona's most deadliest spot. And you have to remember, that's only 24 dead men that we can verify. But it turned out that Edward Shefflin was named the father of Tombstone because he started it all. He spent the summer of 1877 prospecting in these hills alone, and his friends reminded him of the dangers in the area. And they said, because of the Indians, all you're going to find out here will be your tombstone. But eventually he found signs of mineralization. He went to Tucson to get a grub stake or financial backing. Because of his unkempt appearance, being dressed in rags and animal skins and such, he failed to convince anyone that what he found here was worth backing. He eventually had to go up to the Globe Miami area in east central Arizona, get his brother Al and another miner by the name of Dick Gerd down to help him develop the mine. He named it the Tombstone in reference to what his friend said he would find. But it turned out the Tombstone was not rich for long. It gradually ran out. Further exploration quickly produced a second strike, and that was named the Graveyard because Ed felt that all of their hopes laid buried there. And as luck would have it, that mine also quit early. But Ed reasoned that if all these little tiny strikes were here and they could be found, that somewhere in the immediate area there had to be a main vein, what you would call a mother lode, or a hill of silver. And Al and Dick, they agreed. So they decided to give it an all-out, one last attempt. They turned the fireplace of Bronco's cabin into a smelter, and in sheer desperation they explored further. And it was a good thing for Ed that they did, because within a few days, Ed found a ledge where the ore assayed out to $15,000 to the ton in silver and $1,500 to the ton in gold. And all indications were that, unlike the first two mines, the veins of this one ran deep. When Ed found that strike, his friends told him, they said, "By golly, Ed, you know, you're really a lucky cuss." Thus was born the richest mine in the area at the time, the Lucky Cuss. Two more strikes quickly followed. One wasn't really that rich, but it did pay to develop it. It would eventually turn a profit. So they named that one the Good Enough. The other one, though, it had a very rich vein of silver, but that silver vein was fractured. It meandered. It was difficult to follow and develop the mine. And that one they named the Tough Nut. Claims on the mines had to be filed in Tucson. Subsequently, word was starting to get out. Something was up. Other miners and other prospectors soon started showing up. One pair by the name of Hank Williams and John Oliver made an agreement with Ed and Gerd that they would share any strikes if Gerd would do their assaying for them. And assaying means breaking down the ore samples to see if they contain any traces of minerals, and if so, how much. But anyway, Williams and Oliver, they soon did make a good-sized strike. Just as fast, they tried cheating Ed out of his share. When Ed did get them to recognize the error of their ways, Ed named his half of the mine the Contention. Hank Williams and John Oliver named their half the Grand Central. So don't let it be said that these guys lacked humor. In a nutshell, that was the beginning. By then, the word was getting out. Mountains of silver were waiting. And all you had to do, just go to the southeast Arizona territory and claim it. Or so it seemed. This was the last chance. The gold fields of California, they were all staked and claimed. And most of the preliminary mineral exploration in the country had sewn up any other large, rich, known areas. So this was the last chance. For a lot of these poor people coming here, this was the last hurrah, and they knew it. So it was. A tent camp came into being on a mesa that was formerly called Goose Flats. The small prospector, he didn't have the money nor the expertise needed for development, so he sold out to well-heeled parties usually financed from back east. The merchants arrived to fill the needs for products. The gamblers saw easy pickings and easy marks. And the ladies of the evening, well, they saw easy money and they appeared. All the camp followers took their places. The camp evolved into a town. The town retained the name Tombstone. Life was tough. Only the strong and those quick with a gun would survive. And you must remember that this was after the Civil War was over, and many men who were trained to kill and had absolutely no qualms about doing so were roaming the country, and they were usually pretty well armed. Little did the people in the very beginning realize that the name Tombstone fit the town, no pun intended, to a T. The town site was laid out March 5th, 1879. By March of 1880, the population was sitting at about 1,000 people. 3 short months later, by June of 1880, it stood at over 3,000. By 1882, the figure was 5,300 and growing. And that's quite a jump back then, because you have to remember, there weren't any roads, there weren't any cars. Transportation was very difficult at best. Hardly anyone had horses or buggies that were here. They were mainly walking. Fewer yet had the $7 stagecoach fee for an 11-hour ride from Tucson. Tombstone quickly became the largest city between St. Louis and San Francisco. Tombstone quickly became something else. It was the most hell-raising, the baddest, the bawdiest. Tombstone was the deadliest, and it was the most lawless town of the West. There was so much violence and mayhem here that the then President of the United States, Chester A. Arthur, in 1882, threatened to send in the army and declare martial law. And that was not because of any one event. That was because of the general demeanor of the town. And few other towns, if any, share that distinction. But it was, of course, the gunfight at the OK Corral that ensured Tombstone's place in history forever. So let's go into the town, see what the town offers a visitor of today. And let me mention that Tombstone is not a ghost town. If it was, it would have been picked apart a long time ago. And since the mining is just on a very tiny scale of its former self, and the county seat was shifted to Bisbee, Tombstone's role in life has dramatically changed. Tombstone is now the top tourist attraction by far here in southeastern Arizona. Gone are the desperados and the card sharks. Gone the killings. Gone are the ladies of the evening. They've all been replaced by historical museums, acting groups portraying the old days, friendly southwestern hospitality and good western cooking, and gift shops. As we mentioned earlier, the town was planned out March of 1879, and at that time, Fremont Street was supposed to have been the main street. So they made it 80 foot wide to allow room for the driving of the large ore carts to and from the mines. But it turned out that Allen Street wound up being the main drag, and that happened the minute the first gambling hall and saloon opened for business. And this is Allen Street today. On Sundays, the residents rope off the streets to allow the many visitors easy access to take photos. It also allows the local groups room to perform street shows like gunfights, hold-ups, and hangings, and so forth. The following description of Tombstone is taken from the November 8, 1879 edition of the Arizona Citizen newspaper, and I quote, "The town is growing rapidly, and it's filling up with many other elements besides that of legitimate business. Saloons of the lowest class, and dance houses of men and women of the vilest sort, herd together and make the night hideous, are becoming well-settled institutions, and unless suppressed or strictly regulated, they will breed crime and death. Shooting has been a frequent thing, though happily the marksmanship has been very bad and but little damage was done." Unquote. Well, two things became clear pretty quick. The institutions that the article referred to as being suppressed or strictly regulated never were. The marksmanship that the paper said was very bad improved dramatically and quickly. This is our first stop, one of the institutions the newspaper article was referring to. This establishment is one of many that contributed to Tombstone's very bad reputation. This was the most famous honky-tonk in America between 1881 and 1889. The Birdcage Theater, with the word theater used just a little loosely. Construction was completed and the Birdcage opened in December of 1881. In 1882, the New York Times referred to it as the wildest, the wickedest night spot in America. Now how's that for instant notoriety? The Birdcage was a saloon, it was a gambling hall, it was a live show theater, and it was a whorehouse, all rolled up into one. It's said that the good ladies of Tombstone wouldn't even walk on this side of the street. In fact, one of the owners at the time held a ladies' night, whereas all the good ladies of Tombstone, if they appeared, would be admitted free and probably have free drinks. He shouldn't have bothered. Turned out it was a total flop. Not one good lady of Tombstone dared appear. Inside, one can see mute evidence of the 16 gunfights that took place here. Bullet holes, they're all over, they're commonplace, they're everywhere. The portrait of Lady Fatima, the belly dancer, carries 6 bullet holes and 1 knife rip. A stanchion holding up the bar carries a large hole you could stick your thumb in it, probably from a 44-40. Then there's bullet holes all over the ceiling. To the right of the bar was a dumbwaiter. It carried drinks up to the second floor rooms, where the percentage girls carried on their business behind drawn drapes, hence the name Birdcage. And this is where the refrain for the song, "She's Only a Bird in a Gilded Cage," originated. And if you don't believe that the bird cages were popular and busy, just take a quick look at the wear that the stairs have taken. The customers in the 14 separate cages, they could close the drapes and conduct business, or they could open the drapes and view the stage show below. If their lady of the moment left them with any money, they could come down to the gaming floor and take their chances there. Here, Monte, poker, roulette, and most games of chance where the house could split a profit, they were played here. And the fact that the dealer wore the gun, that was not just for show. In the back is Tombstone's most valuable individual antique. It's called the Black Maria. This original Boot Hill hearse is trimmed in 24-karat gold and sterling silver. The Birdcage's operation ended after the demise of Tombstone's great mines. It was closed July of 1892 by its owner Joe Bignan. And the way Joe Bignan closed it was unique and very fortunate for us today, because you see, he just locked up the doors and he walked away. So now almost everything that you see here, from the curtains and the wallpaper, the tables, the chairs, the stage, the piano, they're all original. It was reopened in 1934, just dusted off, and turned into a historical landmark, and it's been popular ever since. This is a #1 attraction here in Tombstone that really should not be missed. On the corner of 5th and Allen Street, in the heart of town, stands one of the most imposing structures, and at one time one of the busiest. When it was built in 1879, it was called the Golden Eagle Brewery, and today it's better known as the Crystal Palace. And this was one of the first buildings built, and is one of the few to have survived Tombstone's two large city-leveling fires. The second floor contained the offices of Dr. George Goodfellow, who was a retired Army surgeon and an authority on gunshot wounds. There was also the office of Town Marshal Virgil Earp, Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Behan, Judge Wells Spicer, and the town coroner, a Dr. Harry Matthews. And where else but in Tombstone would the so-called good guys have the offices above a saloon and gambling hall? But anyway, a saloon and gambling hall the Crystal Palace was. It was one of Tombstone's 110. But this was one of Tombstone's very few refined saloons. The gambling here was supposedly honest. The fine liquor, not watered down, was served in very fancy glassware. And the entertainment, it was very sedate, very low-keyed. This was not the birdcage. This was a place you could take your wife, or maybe even the lady that you were courting, out for a nice, entertaining evening. And today's customers, they can order their drinks at the same saloon that served the Earp brothers and Bat Masterson, Doc Holliday, John Slaughter, Frank Leslie, and a host of other famous and infamous people. The Crystal Palace remains open today to serve the visitor who wants to enter one of the few remaining doorways to yesteryear. And not much imagination is needed, as its appearance today is exactly as it was back then. Next door to the Crystal Palace is the famous Tombstone Epitaph, the only newspaper to survive to this date. It was founded May 1st, 1880, by John P. Clum. It was called the Epitaph because, according to Mr. Clum, every tombstone needed its epitaph. Originally, the building served as a union hall for the miners, and inside on display is the original printing press that was used when the paper first started up. And next to the press is displayed the last 4 pages of type as they were set when daily printing finally ceased. When the mines flooded and the ore stopped, when the pumps failed to keep the water at bay, and when the county seat was voted to be moved to Bisbee in 1929, other papers throughout the state and other papers throughout the country declared that Tombstone would soon go belly up. But it was the Epitaph's editor at the time, a Mr. W.H. Kelly, who coined the phrase as his response. And that was, "The town too tough to die." One thing that the Epitaph presently offers, along with a monthly Old West edition, is a reprint of the direct testimony of the hearing that was held immediately following the OK Corral shootout. And that issue is extremely interesting, since it was right after the shootout, and it was not clouded with hearsay or fiction. John Clum later went on to become a mayor of Tombstone, one of the few true friends and defender of the Earps. And in 1898, he was sent to Alaska under government contract to establish the postal system for the gold-mad hordes that were going to the Alaska Territory. About a block and a half away from the Epitaph is the world-famous Rose Tree Inn Museum. The building was originally a saloon built in the mid-1880s. It was converted into a boarding house and used as a boarding house continuously until 1951. In 1964, it was converted into an interesting museum showing, among other things, the actual rooms with the actual old furniture completely intact. But of prime interest is the over 7,000 square foot rose tree in the rear patio. And it was described in 1933 as the world's largest. Planted in the fall of 1885, this Lady Banksia English rose blooms faithfully in the month of April, and it is truly a sight to see. The thousands of small white roses and the fragrance that they produce make the rose tree something that should not be missed by any of our visitors. The rose tree's fragrance, when blooming, can be noticed throughout the town. A block away from the Rose Tree Inn is the most stately building here in Tombstone, the courthouse. Cochise County was formed in 1881, and since Tombstone far and away was the most important community in the territory, it was chosen as the county seat. The building was completed in the fall of 1882 at the astronomical cost back then of almost $50,000. It served as the county seat until 1929, when the county seat was voted to be moved to Bisbee. In 1955, the Tombstone Restoration Commission started the long and expensive task of restoring the building. In 1958, the Arizona State Parks Board acquired the building, completed restoration, and opened the building to the public. This is the second-floor courtroom, where 5 bandits were found guilty of robbing a store in Bisbee, killing 3 people in the process. They were all sentenced to hang, and did so. One enterprising entrepreneur even went so far as to construct bleachers for the event, and he even sold tickets. The bleachers were never used, as they were ripped down the evening before the hanging by a woman and her followers who thought that quite possibly that was going just a tad too far. The last to swing here were the Haldeman brothers in November 1900, after being found guilty of killing a sheriff and his deputy. And the courthouse is a fine place to visit, since it captures almost all the aspects of daily life here. There aren't too many buildings of this quality left in today's American West. The courthouse is closed only on Christmas Day. Across from the courthouse is a line of old buildings. This was called back then Rotten Row. Now this was referred to as Rotten Row because of the people who once used the buildings. And you see, when the courthouse was used as a courthouse, these were the offices of the lawyers. Considering Tombstone's lawlessness and its violence, its gambling halls, its red light districts, this building should be considered something of a minor miracle. This is St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the oldest Protestant church still standing on its original site and used for its intended purpose in Arizona. Construction started in the early months of 1881, financed mostly by the donation of gamblers. The first service was held by Endicott Peabody on June 18, 1881. The interior of the church looks exactly now as it originally did. It is able to seat 150 people. Behind the altar door on your right, there is a trap door. That trap door leads to a stone cellar. The cellar was there to be used in case of an Indian attack. The interior lighting, it originally came from a whaling ship, and it burned whale oil. The stained glass windows, they are all the originals. They were hauled overland by wagon train from San Francisco, and each one of the windows is unique. Each one of the windows has its own meaning. The only thing not original is the bell tower and the belfry. The original one was demolished by lightning, and this brick replica was built in its place in 1917. And the shake shingle roof has been replaced also. The other building still used for what it was designed for is this. This is Tombstone's City Hall. Built in 1881, it's been expertly maintained, and today it is a photographer's dream. Half a block down Fremont Street from the City Hall stands Shefflin Hall. This is considered the largest adobe building in the Southwest. It was built by Al Shefflin as a dramatic shrine for the people of Tombstone. It was used as a hall for concerts, recitals, and debates. And the large stage, it was used for plays starting September 1881. The last play was January 23rd, 1917. And this building was used by what we would call the other half of Tombstone society, that being the doctors, the lawyers, the mining officials, the businessmen, the so-called good people. Wyatt Earp and his brother Morgan Earp attended a play here March 18, 1882. An hour after the show finished, Morgan was killed. He was shot to death in a pool hall on Allen Street in revenge for his participation in the OK Corral shootout. You know, thousands of visitors a day on the average pass this corner, yet very few know what they are going by. Here on one corner is the home that Virgil Earp once lived in, nicely maintained and up to its eaves in history. Just diagonally, across corner, is the home of his most famous brother, Wyatt Earp. And in between the two, across the street of either house, lived one of the biggest enemies of the Earps, Mr. Pete Spence. Now, Mr. Pete Spence, he was named in the coroner's jury for killing Morgan Earp, and he was also involved in the December 1881 shooting of Virgil Earp. Buildings in Tombstone that are passed by unnoticed. This, for instance, located right on Fremont Street and 3rd, is the Aztec House, and it was built 1881 as a gentleman's hotel by a group of California investors. It was home to a host of Tombstone's leading citizens. The Aztec House manager, through these side windows, witnessed the OK Corral shootout between the Earps and the Clantons. This building, which is now used as the Tombstone Information Center, was one of Tombstone's first banks, and it was founded by a Mr. H. Solomon. It seemed that many people that left Tombstone, or at least got out alive, went on to start lucrative businesses and careers elsewhere, like Mr. Solomon. The Solomons now run a large bond buying and banking business. And this used to be the Can restaurant. It was owned in partnership by Ah Lum, and Mr. Lum's wife was called China Mary. And China Mary, she was the iron-fisted controller of the several hundred Chinese population. It seems that no Chinese was ever hired for work without seeing or going through China Mary first. She guaranteed their integrity, their honesty, and their hard-working ability. She also handled the narcotics trade, supplying opium to the red light district. She ran gambling games, and she was well connected to the Tong and other gangs located in San Francisco. And the restaurant, it was famous for serving fresh seafood. And the seafood was hauled in by wagon train from the Gulf of California under wet tarps. As Tombstone had its share of infamously bad people, it also had its share of good people. Although the good people, they really don't get much press. One of the most famous was Nellie Cashman, and she was referred to as the Angel of Tombstone. She ran this boarding house and restaurant and was a true friend of Tombstone's down and out. If anyone wants to know more about the people of Tombstone, this would be a pretty good person to start with. And she was the one who demolished the gallows bleachers that we spoke of before. And she also led a party of gold seekers to Baja California, reputedly finding gold, but keeping it quiet because she did not want to disturb the harmony of that area. She had seen what silver brought in the way of Tombstone, and she didn't want it hanging over her head that she would have been the cause of that somewhere else. She left Tombstone and in 1898 joined the rush to the Klondike, where 20 years later she died of pneumonia in a British Columbia hospital that she herself had collected money to build. And another important person to Tombstone in the West was Cornelius S. Fly. Now, C.S. Fly entered Tombstone initially in 1878. He moved his business here along with his wife permanently to Tombstone in 1879. And it's because of Fly's photographic business and his wife's expertise that we have old photos of Tombstone, of the West, and of Geronimo's surrender to General Crook. Thousands of photos were taken by Fly, but unfortunately, many were lost when his business burned to the ground. A good collection of his photos now hang in the Fly Gallery, which has been recreated on the same spot. But the hunt is on. If anyone in the audience has, or knows of anybody who has old photos or old glass plates taken by Fly, we would be interested in hearing from you. The address is on the VCR cover. Throughout the film, you've heard reference made to the OK Corral gunfight. The West's most famous gunfight is said to happen here in the OK Corral. Let's take a second and set the record straight. It didn't. It happened outside of the rear lot of the OK Corral, where it corners onto Fremont Street, and was right next to Fly's photographic studio. Hollywood, while using the gunfight as basis to countless movies, can be blamed for that piece of misinformation. The OK Corral has been rebuilt to appear exactly as it did on that faithful day, October 26, 1881. And this was a complete corral. From here you could rent a horse, you could rent a buggy, and you could board or feed a horse, you could buy or rent tack. And there was also an office, there was a complete blacksmith shop, and there was a bunkhouse so the Wells Fargo and stage drivers, they could rest. In the rear, there was what they call a trap, or a area where you could turn your horse loose and let him get exercise. But it's known for the OK Corral gunfight, so let's go on with that. Trouble had been brewing between the Earps and the Clantons and the McLowrys for a long time. The supposed good guys were Marshal Virgil Earp, his brothers Morgan and Wyatt, who at that time were deputized. Also along with them was a one Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday was a sometime dentist, sometimes gambler, sometimes drunk, but he was always deadly, and he was a true friend to the Earps. The so-called bad guys, they were Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLowry, and Billy Claiborne. And there's no fine line between good and bad. The bad, or sometimes called cowboys, they were the hellraisers, the cattle thieves, the town bullies. They were always mixed up in something. If you ever seen an old western where the group of guys come riding in, hell-bent for leather, stop at the first saloon, commence to get drunk and shoot up the town, well, you just seen the cowboys. The Earps, well, the Earps weren't as honest and upstanding as they were portrayed in the movies. Back then, good was never that good. On this same old movie, you ever seen the sheriff? He wore all white, tall white hat, had chrome guns tied to his legs. He was kind to children and old ladies, rode a white horse. Well, if you seen that, you did not see the Earps. And then there was good old Doc Holliday. Nobody here believed for 1 second that he made his living just from dentistry. He had a quick and violent temper, and he was already dying from tuberculosis, and he knew it. So he had what you might want to call an attitude problem. He had nothing to lose. Job description of a gambler back then would include fast with a gun and the guts to use it. And then there was also Johnny Behan. Oh, Johnny Behan, he was the town sheriff. He hated the Earps. He did what he could to make the Earps' life miserable. And the fact that Behan's mistress left him and took up and moved in with Wyatt Earp, well, as you can imagine, that really didn't help. In fact, the Epitaph printed a warning August 19th, 1881, when it wrote, "There is altogether too much good feeling between the sheriff's office and the outlaws or cowboys infesting this country." And it, of course, was referring to Mr. Behan. Anyway, it was a little after 2:30 p.m., October 26th, 1881, and it all came boiling to a head. It took about 24 seconds and 30 to 35 shots to burn Tombstone into history forever. A very fine reenactment created by the Wild Bunch is portrayed here. End result, Billy Clanton shot dead. Frank McLowry shot dead. Tom McLowry shot dead. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne, they both ran when the shooting started. Billy Claiborne was later gunned down in Tombstone by buckskin Frank Leslie. Ike Clanton was killed in Apache County, Arizona, June 1st, 1887, while resisting arrest on a cattle rustling warrant. Virgil Earp was wounded and later ambushed in Tombstone and crippled for life. He later died in Goldfield, Nevada in 1905. Morgan Earp, he was wounded only to be ambushed and shot dead while playing pool in Tombstone. A bullet creased Doc Holliday's coat, he walked away unharmed. He died of TB in a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, 6 years later. Wyatt Earp walked away from the gunfight unhurt. He passed away peacefully in Los Angeles, California, January 13, 1929, at the ripe old age of 81. He spent his last years as a real estate speculator and recounting his memoirs. And the only thing that we're left with from the gunfight are graves in Boot Hill and a mystery. And the mystery being, why didn't C.S. Fly take any photos, since it happened virtually right outside his doorstep? And after talking to a noted historian and author here, I find out that he thinks that maybe it's possible that Fly did take photos, since he was a very, very dedicated photographer. But if he did, and the Earps seen him, which is possible, the Earps may have destroyed the plates later. Immediately after opening of the first saloon, it was determined that another establishment was badly needed. This is Boot Hill Cemetery, called Boot Hill because many of the people here went to their reward with their boots on. And Boot Hill was laid out, no pun intended, as the cemetery in late 1878 and used as such until about 1884. And by then a new cemetery was starting to be used more frequently. There are over 250 souls that rest here that have been documented. And there's two stories as to why they quit using the cemetery. And one says that the good people of Tombstone, they started to object to being buried next to the bad people, or as they call them, the riffraff. That may or may not be the reason. I believe that the people here realized after they were dead, it didn't matter anymore. You could bury them standing up. They wouldn't know. But what with all the dying that was being done here, through killings and murders, suicides, mine accidents, Indians, and drinking, I believe Boot Hill was starting to get just plain filled up. But let's take a tour. I'll pick out those with interesting stories concerning their deaths. John Hicks' only claim to fame is that he was the first on record to be buried here. John was shot and killed while sticking up for a friend during an argument. John's brother Boyce, who was with John, got shot in the head. He was blinded for life. Earlier we made reference to Mrs. Alum, China Mary, the iron-fisted ruler of the 700 or so Chinese that were here. While next to China Mary lies her husband's partner in the Can-Can restaurant and one of Tombstone's old-timers, Quang Ki. Now Quang Ki, he originally was buried in a pauper's grave in Bisbee. His friends had his body moved here to rest beside his Tombstone cohorts. Behind this ornate ironwork is the final resting place of Mrs. Stump. Now Mrs. Stump, it seems, died from an overdose of chloroform during childbirth. And there used to be 3 other graves surrounded by the ornate ironwork like this. But the ironwork was removed during the Depression of the 1930s. And no record exists of a malpractice suit filed against the good doctor. This grave had to be dug a little deeper, a whole lot wider. Remember in the courthouse we made reference to the 5 men that were hung together? The 5 that were found guilty of robbing the Goldwater Castaneda General Store in Bisbee and killing 3 people in the process? Well, they were caught, tried, sentenced to hang together. They fulfilled their destiny March 8, 1884. 1:18 p.m. the door swung open. And there was John Heath. Now John Heath, he was their leader, but he didn't actually participate. He was what you would call maybe the brains. And he was given a separate trial on that basis. He was sentenced to life at the Yuma Territorial Penitentiary. But the citizens of Bisbee, they were a little outraged at what they considered a pretty light sentence. On February 22, 1884, a group of about 50 heavily armed men from Bisbee broke Heath out of the Tombstone jail, and they made things right. They took him to a telegraph pole and they hung him until dead. The coroner in his report said that John's death was from emphysema of the lungs, which may have been and probably was caused by strangulation, self-inflicted or otherwise. And now he put it that way because he probably knew who did the hanging. And he really didn't want any trouble for himself. You can almost see and you can almost feel what you would call the heartbeat of Tombstone through these graves. Here lies Jim Hickey, shot to death by William Claiborne because Hickey was harassing Claiborne. But Hickey got his revenge 13 months later. Here lies Claiborne, shot to death by a true gunman, Buckskin Frank Leslie, because Claiborne was harassing Leslie. Seems like what goes around comes around. Talking about Buckskin Frank Leslie, here lies Killeen. Killeen was shot to death by gunman Buckskin Frank Leslie because Leslie wanted Killeen's wife, Mary, for himself. And he got her. After he killed Killeen, he married the happy widow. You notice many grave sites are marked suicide. Many people's dreams were not fulfilled in this land of silver. And also many are marked unknown. People back then, they didn't keep records like our record-flooded society does nowadays. Also, a lot of people normally changed their names when they came into a new town. Some had reasons, like they were running from the law. And others, they thought they had good reasons too. They just got tired of their old names. And people died over the most minor, silliest things. This guy, he wore the wrong color shirt. Black and blue plaid, considered loud in those days. He got very drunk. He beat up a few people making rude remarks about his shirt. And one of them that he beat up went home, washed up, got a gun, and pumped 4 bullets into Tom Waters. And the murderer, ironically, was Tom's best friend. Now I wonder if this is where the saying comes from, with friends like this, you don't need enemies. But he got let off scot-free because Tom Waters was considered the one who really started it all. And sometimes the headstone tells it all. Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a .44. No less, no more. Lester Moore was a Wells Fargo agent, and he was shot by a disgruntled customer. If Lester Moore's name was something other than Lester Moore, his headstone very likely would be like many others here and just say, murdered or shot to death. It doesn't tell the whole story. It only took 1 shot from Lester's gun as he was falling to kill his murderer. Then there was the little episode between Gold Dollar and Margarita. And Gold Dollar was the trade name for one of Tombstone's over 800 licensed prostitutes. She was living with a gambler named Billy Mill Green, and she wanted very much to keep it that way. Margarita moved into town. Margarita quickly got a job at the Birdcage. Since we know what kind of place the Birdcage was, we know a little bit about Margarita. She saw Billy. She said something to the effect, "That's for me." Billy went gambling at the Birdcage one day after solemnly promising Gold Dollar that's all he was going to do. He was only going to gamble. Gold Dollar, she wasn't too convinced. She went to the Birdcage, peeked in one of the front windows, just in time to see Margarita sitting on Billy's lap. Gold Dollar took a knife from her garter. She went after Margarita. No action was ever taken against Gold Dollar for murdering Margarita. And some people had a great send-off when they arrived here, like Dutch Annie. It's said that she had over 1,000 buggies in her funeral procession. And why was Dutch Annie so popular? Well, they called Dutch Annie the queen of the red light district. That may be a clue. Then there was Johnny Blair. No long funeral procession for Johnny Blair. He died of smallpox. Back then it was a disease dreaded by everybody. And after he died, his good friends, they didn't even want to touch him. So they threw a rope around his feet, mounted up, and dragged John to this hastily dug deep grave. But the most notable graveside here is the aftermath of the OK Corral shootout. Old man Clanton was already dead by the time the OK Corral shootout took place. He was shot while herding stolen Mexican cattle up to Tombstone. He was originally buried on a ranch closer to where his killing happened. And later, after his son Billy was killed in the shootout, old man Clanton's body was exhumed and moved here in 1881 to rest beside his son. And because friends of the McLowrys and friends of the Clantons thought that the Earps and Holiday didn't even give him a chance, they erected this marker which showed what they thought happened: murder. Boot Hill was restored and all of its records verified, along with places of rest, in 1923. and again in the mid-40s. In the placement of all markers, all the available sources of history were used, so the main body of the cemetery is exactly as it was in the 1880s. There's one other grave marker left, and this is Ed Shefflin's monument. And although Ed died wealthy, he was a prospector first. He died in 1897 near Canyonville in the Oregon wilderness while prospecting. And his last wish was fulfilled when he was brought back here to Tombstone to be buried. And his last wish is this: "It is my wish, if convenient, to be buried in the dress of a prospector, my old pick, my old canteen with me, on the top of the granite hills about 3 miles west of the city of Tombstone, Arizona. That a monument such as prospectors may build when locating a mining claim be built over my grave, and no other slab, no other monument be erected. And I request that none of my friends wear crepe. Under no circumstances do I want to be buried in a graveyard or a cemetery." And so he was. And what a monument it is. The diameter of its base is 16 feet, and it's 25 foot tall and made out of granite rocks gathered from this hill and held together with cement. These are some of the mines as they appear today, and this is the area that tourists never get to see, and it's probably a good thing. One misstep here could be very dangerous. So what happened? What caused the seemingly never-ending activity here to finally come to a halt? At 560 feet in the sulfurite shaft, the miners struck the most precious commodity here in the desert. They hit water. And at first it was looked upon with favor. Prior to this, the only fresh water was piped in from the Huachuca Mountains, 31 miles away. Or you could have it hauled in at $2 a gallon. And that's why they say that a lot of people here drank their whiskey straight. But the glee is soon turned to gloom when the Grand Central shaft also struck water at the same depth. Water had to be removed before any mine could dig deeper. Huge pumps, able to remove 500,000 gallons of water a day, had little effect. And finally in 1883, the Grand Central and the contention mines, they went together, and they spent $350,000 on 2 lines of huge Cornish pumps. They were the territory's first, and that dropped the water by about 100 feet. But to pay for the pumps, the wages of the miners had to be cut from $4 a day to $3 a day. And of course the miners, they really didn't agree with that, and they promptly walked off the job. The ensuing strike soon turned violent, and the governor had to send in troops from nearby Fort Huachuca, and the mines stood idle. Finally, a little while after the miners went back to work, in 1886, a fire swept through the Grand Central pumps, causing them to quit. The pumps of the contention closed down rather than try pumping alone. And then in 1893 came a depression and also the demonetization of silver. Silver was set free to float, to find its own worth in the market, and it quickly lost value. It seemed that silver could not compete against gold. And that was virtually the end. It got too expensive to mine. There was a slight revitalization in about 1900, but after a decade of mining activity, only $4 million of silver was produced. And it was deemed that because of the expense of pumping the water out and the low production, that $4 million was too little for 10 years of trying. So in 1911, it shut down again. Total dollar value mined between the years of 1879 through 1936 was about $37,103,008, give or take. And remember, that's at the price of minerals at the time. Today's dollar values would be considerably higher. You would probably just add another zero to the end. And people here say silver is still in the ground, and companies are waiting for it to go up in value, and then mining may start again. But every cloud has got its dark lining. The least expensive way to get ore is by strip mining, but strip mining would lay waste to the fragile ecology here. And nevertheless, it wouldn't hurt Tombstone, because Tombstone is classified as a historic landmark. And anyway, as we all know, Tombstone is the town too tough to die. By the way, keep the film running all the way to the end. I got something special to show you. You know, during the course of creating the narration, I often by chance come across information that's not known to our visitors, and like in this case, completely unknown even to the locals here, at least until now. And I thought it was interesting. Since it is factual, I'd like to share it with you. The pistol that you see is called a pocket pistol of Navy caliber, and that was when manufacturing began in 1853. It's a Colt, 36 caliber, and shoots a ball by using black powder. Because of its cut down size, its silver plating, and its abundant engraving, the owner believes it may have been a gambler's pistol or maybe even a shopkeeper's gun. This was somebody definitely higher up on the ladder of income. And here's the interesting part. The pistol was found in the crawl space under the old Epitaph building in the early 1930s. Why it was hidden is anybody's guess, and why the owner never came back for it can only be left to speculation. It's very possible, all things considered, that the owner met an untimely and quick death, thus maintaining Tombstone's roughly a death-a-day average during its turbulent years. And, you know, Tombstone has not changed much throughout the years. It has all the conveniences, but they were not put in at the aesthetic cost of the town. Look close at this 1880 photograph. This shows Allen Street, and notice on your right is the Crystal Palace. And we'll soon dissolve to a recent shot of the same street from roughly the same position, and with the exception of paved streets and curbs and advertising, you'll notice how little it has changed. Okay, now this is 1880, and this is the present. You must realize when you see Tombstone, you're looking at an authentic Old West town as it really was. This is not somebody's rendition of what an Old West town should have looked like. Tombstone hosts many events centered around the late 1800s, and two of the largest are Rendezvous of the Gunfighter and Eldorado Days. Rendezvous of the Gunfighter, that takes place during the Labor Day weekend, and groups who are deeply entrenched with the Old West, they come from throughout the United States and other countries to put on shows for your enjoyment. And Eldorado Days, they happen on the third weekend of October, and that's been taking place since 1929. Other crowd gathering events include Territorial Days, Wyatt Earp Days, Vigilante Days, and there's also Nellie Cashman Day, and just a host of others. Plus, there's always events planned for Father's Day and the 4th of July, and I could rattle on and on, but instead, here's two phone numbers. The Visitor Information Center is staffed by volunteers. They'll be more than happy to answer any questions or help you plan your visit. The second number is the Epitaph. They're open 8 hours a day, 364 days a year. And a word of caution, most of Tombstone is closed up tight on Christmas Day. And if you only get one vacation a year, you should use it to the max. Call first. Don't miss an event by a day or two. This film is showing you most of the high spots, and in each one you could easily spend an hour or more talking to the very friendly people. There's lots here to see and do on the first and third Sundays of the month. Except in October, the Wild Bunch puts on an excellent 45-minute or so show in the OK Corral. And on alternate weekends on Sundays, the Vigilantes, they shoot up Allen Street to the delight of our visitors. And sometimes they'll even hang a visitor or two. But of course, it's all in good fun. Why, you can even come here and pan for semi-precious minerals, and you can get a feel of what the prospectors may have gone through when they were looking for their El Dorado. Best thing is, you get to keep what shows in your pan. Tombstone has all the conveniences expected. There's 3 large recreational vehicle parks with modern pull-through hookups and all facilities. And the many hotels range from very modern to strictly Western. And as you can imagine, the good cooking comes with a decidedly Western flair. In our restaurants here, you will not find any pre-cooked, pre-chewed food. And while talking to a lot of people here, the conversation generally turns to, where did you move from and why did you elect to live in Tombstone? And the answer is always the same, and it goes like this. We came here to visit, we fell in love with the town, we fell in love with the atmosphere, and we decided to move here. And you know, that, my friends, makes a tremendous difference. It's easy to see why Tombstone is the largest single tourist attraction here in southeast Arizona. Now here's to something special. This is Territorial Brass out of Mesa, Arizona. I caught them performing during Eldorado Days. They used the brass instruments from the late 1800s along with the original uniforms from the 1800s, and they put on a good show. Sit back, relax, they're going to close the film for us. Thank you, enjoy Tombstone and Arizona.
Let us now play for you that very tune that brought Sherman to his feet. Originally written in 1837, here is The Lancer's Quickstep.
Now the following is information on other videos that we offer. These videos are also available in the PAL format. The PAL format plays on VCRs in Australia, Europe, and England. Ghost towns and other haunts. Now these are the towns that helped Arizona develop, but eventually they failed and they went ghost. Some are nothing more than sites, some have standing buildings, and some are open to the public, having interesting tours and very fine museums. We also stop at a Spanish mission, a Butterfield stage station, and I'll tell you about 4 lost buried treasures, and I hope you find them. This is a scenic, colorful video taking you to places that you've probably never been to before. Or touring southern Arizona. I'll introduce you to just some of the well-known places that make southern Arizona the popular attraction that it is. We go to Bisbee and Tombstone. We'll then take an extended tour to the world-famous Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. We'll stop at the beautiful Tumacacori Mission and travel through the ever-popular Saguaro National Monument. We see and go through some of the many telescopes at the Kitt Peak Observatory. And we'll end our day shopping in Nogales in Old Mexico. And while on our way, we stop at the oldest European community in Arizona. That is, of course, colorful Tubac. Touring southern Arizona. It's almost like having a mini vacation without leaving home. Or welcome to Cochise County. Now this county in the southeast corner of Arizona has more attractions per square mile than most other counties. And I'll take you to them. Besides the 2 all-time favorites, Bisbee and Tombstone, we go to Douglas and into Agua Prieta in Old Mexico. From there, we go to the famous historic John Slaughter's San Bernardino Ranch. We'll travel over the Chiricahua Mountains from Portal to the land of Standing Rocks. We visit Wilcox and the famous American Indian Museum, the Amarin Museum, plus much, much more. Now there's enough information on this videotape to last you a lifetime of traveling. Or our latest video, Tombstone, featuring the Boot Hill Gunslingers. Now we'll begin by showing you the most colorful and scenic way to get to Tombstone from Tucson. And then a tour through Tombstone follows and showing you all of its famous attractions. We're then entertained by the famous Western show is brought to you by the award-winning and popular Boot Hill Gunslingers, Tombstone's most active Western theme acting group. This video is informative, and I believe you'll get a laugh out of their acting. It's good. Now, all videos are at least 1 hour long, and the format for the United States, Canadian, Mexico, and Japan NTSC are VHS. They'll play on our VCRs fine. PAL format works in Europe, England, and Australia. The NTSC or American versions are $15.95 plus $3.50 postage per video. Please allow 7 working days delivery. The PAL, PAL, or European versions are $19.95 each plus $8 postage each. Please allow 10 to 15 days delivery on PAL tapes. All payment must be, of course, in U.S. funds. Please send check or money order to Video Tours of Arizona, P.O. Box 64808, Department V, Tucson, Arizona, zip code 85728. And of course, all videos are guaranteed. And thank you, and have a nice day.